From Monty Python's brutal parody to a cigarette controversy that torpedoed her career, the Debbie Reynolds Show's brief 1969 run hides Hollywood's weirdest secrets. Discover how TV's highest-paid female star fought big tobacco, lost everything to a lawsuit, and accidentally starred in a horror film, all while the show's creator invented the teleprompter and opening credits fooled millions. Fact 1. Created by I Love Lucy's mastermind. When the Debbie Reynolds Show premiered in September of 1969, it came with impressive Hollywood pedigree that many viewers didn't realize. The man behind the camera was Jess Oppenheimer, the legendary producer who had created I Love Lucy, one of the most successful sitcoms in television history. Oppenheimer wasn't just borrowing from his past success, he brought along the entire creative team that made Lucy a cultural phenomenon. Bob Carroll Jr. and Madeline Davis, the writing duo who crafted countless iconic I Love Lucy episodes alongside Oppenheimer, joined him to work on Debbie's show. This meant that the same writers who gave the world Lucy Ricardo's chocolate factory disaster and her hilarious grape-stomping mishap were now responsible for Debbie Thompson's comedic adventures. The similarities between the two shows were impossible to miss, and Oppenheimer made no secret of the connection. Like Lucy Ricardo, Debbie Thompson was a housewife with big dreams of having her own career, constantly scheming and getting into trouble despite her husband's wishes that she stay home. The formula that worked so brilliantly in the 1950s was being repackaged for a late 60s audience. However, Oppenheimer faced a unique challenge. Debbie Reynolds was already an established movie star with her own strong opinions about how the show should run. Unlike the relatively unknown Lucille Ball, who had trusted Oppenheimer completely at the start of I Love Lucy. Despite having television's most successful sitcom creator at the helm with his proven team of writers, the Debbie Reynolds Show struggled to capture the magic that made I Love Lucy legendary, proving that even the greatest creative minds can't always replicate their past triumphs. Fact 2. Highest paid female on television. At the time the Debbie Reynolds Show hit the airwaves, Debbie Reynolds wasn't just another actress trying her luck on the small screen. She was commanding the biggest paycheck of any woman on television. In 1969, Reynolds had negotiated a deal that made her the highest-paid female performer in the entire television industry, reflecting her enormous star power from her film career. This wasn't just a vanity title or a minor distinction. It represented a significant achievement in an era when women rarely received top billing or top dollar in Hollywood. Reynolds leveraged her fame from blockbuster movies like Singin' in the Rain and the unsinkable Molly Brown to secure a contract that other actresses could only dream about. The deal included not just her substantial salary, but also unprecedented creative control over the show's content and even approval rights over which sponsors could advertise during her program. NBC was willing to pay such enormous sums because they believed Reynolds' name recognition would guarantee massive ratings and advertising revenue. Her contract also included a guaranteed second season, a starring role in an NBC-produced feature film, and partial ownership of a future network series she wouldn't even need to appear in. The network essentially bet the farm on Reynolds, convinced that television's most expensive female star would deliver television's most successful new sitcom. However, the immense financial investment NBC made in Reynolds would become one of the most contentious aspects of their relationship, especially when disagreements over cigarette advertising threatened to derail everything. The irony was painful. Being television's highest-paid woman meant nothing when the entire deal collapsed. Fact 3. The opening credits were intentionally self-mocking. The opening sequence of the Debbie Reynolds Show featured one of the most unusual gags in sitcom history, and many viewers weren't sure if it was intentional or just bad filmmaking. Each episode began with Reynolds and her television husband Don Chastain running toward each other through a beautiful field of daisies in slow motion, arms outstretched in what appeared to be a romantic reunion straight out of a love story. But here's where it got weird. Instead of embracing as audiences expected, they completely missed each other and kept running past, leaving viewers confused about whether they just witnessed a joke or a production mistake. According to some cast members and viewers who remembered the show, this was actually a deliberate spoof of overly sentimental sitcom opening sequences that had become cliches by the late 1960s. The whole thing was meant to be funny, a way of signaling that the show didn't take itself too seriously and was willing to poke fun at television conventions. However, the joke seems to have gone over many people's heads, with some audience members genuinely thinking it was just poorly edited footage. The theme song that played over this sequence, titled "With a Little Love" and performed by Reynolds herself, added to the romantic atmosphere that the visual then immediately undercut. This self-aware humor in the opening credits suggested a show trying to be more sophisticated than typical sitcom fare, perhaps acknowledging that the tired housewife wants a career premise had been done before. Unfortunately, whether viewers understood the joke or not didn't matter much. The show itself struggled to find an audience regardless of how clever its opening sequence tried to be. Fact 4. Monty Python savagely parodied the show. Only months after the Debbie Reynolds Show aired, it became the target of one of Monty Python's most memorable sketches, proving that even struggling American sitcoms weren't safe from British satire. The November 10, 1970 episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus featured a sketch called The Attila the Hun Show, written primarily by John Cleese and Graham Chapman, that ruthlessly mocked the Reynolds series and American sitcoms in general. The Python team didn't just reference the show, they painstakingly recreated the opening credit sequence with Attila the Hun and his wife running toward each other in slow motion through a field, exactly mimicking the romantic meadow scene from Debbie's show. But the truly audacious part was that Monty Python actually bootlegged a recording of Reynolds singing the theme song "With a Little Love" and used it in their parody without permission, something that would be considered copyright infringement today. The sketch transformed the wholesome American family sitcom format into something dark and absurd, with Attila the Hun playing the lovable father figure who comes home from a hard day of mercilessly sweeping across Central Europe. The Python version included deliberately terrible canned laughter and all the saccharine elements of American comedy that British audiences found ridiculous. What made this parody especially cutting was that it aired while the Debbie Reynolds Show was still struggling through its first and only season, so the mockery came while the wound was still fresh. The sketch became far more famous than the show it parodied, with the Attila the Hun Show remaining a cult favorite Python moment while the actual Debbie Reynolds Show faded into obscurity. Fact 5. Cigarette controversy destroyed Reynolds' career. The Debbie Reynolds Show was supposed to launch a new chapter in her career, but instead it ended with one of Hollywood's most principled and costly stands against tobacco advertising. When Reynolds sat down to watch her show's premiere episode on September 16, 1969, she was shocked and furious to discover that the first commercial aired during her program was for Pall Mall cigarettes. This directly violated her contract with NBC, which explicitly promised that no cigarette advertisements would run during her show because Reynolds was strongly opposed to tobacco promotion, especially on a family program that children might watch. Reynolds had been very vocal about her anti-smoking stance before the show even aired, insisting that she would not be associated with cigarette advertising in any way. The network had assured her this wouldn't be a problem, but when American Brands, formerly known as American Tobacco Company, became one of the show's major sponsors, NBC found themselves in a difficult position. Reynolds didn't back down. She immediately contacted the network and threatened to quit if cigarette ads continued to air during her time slot. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Reynolds making her position crystal clear in a statement where she explained that she fully outlined her personal feelings about cigarette advertising and that she would not be party to commercials she considered directly opposed to health and well-being. NBC told her that banning cigarette commercials from her show would be impossible since tobacco advertising was still legal and extremely lucrative. Reynolds kept her resolve anyway, ultimately walking away from approximately $2 million in lost income when she quit the show. Fact 6. The lawsuit that changed everything. Reynolds' battle with NBC over cigarette advertising didn't just end her show, it triggered a lawsuit that destroyed her entire deal with the network and changed the trajectory of her career. When American Brands withdrew their sponsorship after Reynolds' very public objections to cigarette advertising, NBC suddenly found themselves losing substantial advertising revenue they had counted on. The network decided to fight back legally, arguing that Reynolds' actions and the negative publicity she generated had fundamentally broken their business relationship. What Reynolds lost in this legal battle was staggering. Her original contract with NBC had guaranteed her a 2-season run of her sitcom, essentially ensuring job security and income for at least 2 full years, regardless of ratings. The contract also promised her a starring role in a feature film that NBC would produce, giving her a path back to the big screen with network backing and resources. Additionally, the deal included partial ownership of a future NBC series that she wouldn't even need to appear in, meaning she would collect royalties and maintain a relationship with the network long after her own show ended. The lawsuit gave NBC the legal grounds to revoke every single one of these guarantees. The second season was canceled before it could begin. The feature film deal was terminated, and her ownership stake in any future series vanished completely. The adverse publicity from Reynolds' cigarette advertising fight was cited as the reason NBC could void the entire contract, essentially arguing that her principled stand had cost them too much money and damaged their business relationships. Reynolds later admitted the financial devastation was immense, and at one point she found herself literally homeless and living in her car. Fact 7. Ironically, ahead of her time. Debbie Reynolds paid an enormous personal and professional price for refusing to allow cigarette advertising during her television show, but history would prove she was absolutely right to take that stand. The Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act was passed by Congress in April of 1970, just months after Reynolds' very public battle with NBC over tobacco advertising had destroyed her show and her contract. This groundbreaking legislation prohibited all cigarette commercials from being broadcast on television and radio, with the ban officially taking effect on January 2, 1971. Less than a year after Reynolds quit her show over this exact issue. The timing was almost cruel in its irony. If Reynolds had been able to hold on just a little bit longer, or if NBC had been willing to work with her concerns, federal law would have solved the problem for them anyway, and Reynolds wouldn't have sacrificed her career. Reynolds herself noted this bitter irony in later interviews, pointing out that she lost millions of dollars and her television career by standing up against cigarette advertising, only to watch the government ban the exact thing she had been fighting against. The law vindicated everything Reynolds had been saying about the dangers of tobacco advertising and the inappropriateness of promoting cigarettes during family programming that children watched. However, this vindication came too late to save her show or repair her relationship with NBC. Reynolds' sacrifice essentially made her an accidental pioneer in the movement against tobacco advertising and broadcast media, though she paid a price that few others would have been willing to pay for taking such a principled position. Fact 8. Debbie supervised everything, including commercials. Unlike most television stars who simply showed up to read their lines, Debbie Reynolds exercised an unusual level of control over the Debbie Reynolds Show that extended far beyond her on-screen performance. Reynolds personally supervised the writing of scripts, working closely with the show's writers to ensure storylines met her standards and reflected the kind of comedy she wanted to perform. This level of creative involvement was rare for sitcom stars in 1969, when most actors had little say in what their characters did or how episodes developed. But Reynolds' contract gave her even more unprecedented power. She also had approval rights over all sponsor commercials that would air during her show, meaning every advertisement needed to pass her personal inspection before it could run during her time slot. This meant Reynolds was directly responsible for vetting which products and companies could advertise during her program, making her an active participant in the show's commercial side rather than just its creative side. The arrangement gave Reynolds enormous control, but also made her complicit in the show's advertising relationships, which became a significant issue when the cigarette controversy erupted. Reynolds had personally approved other commercials from the same parent company that made the cigarettes. Specifically, she allowed advertisements for Mott's apple juice because that product came from American Brands, the same corporation behind the Pall Mall cigarettes she objected to. This created an awkward situation where Reynolds was essentially picking and choosing which products from the same company were acceptable, rather than refusing to work with tobacco companies altogether. Her supervisory role over commercials meant she couldn't claim complete ignorance about sponsor relationships, and it complicated her moral stance against cigarette advertising when she had approved other products from that sponsor. Fact 9. The show produced a cult horror film. When the Debbie Reynolds Show collapsed amid the cigarette advertising controversy, NBC and Reynolds had to figure out how to settle their destroyed contract, and this settlement resulted in one of the strangest films of Reynolds' career. As part of the compensation for losing her guaranteed second season and her NBC-backed feature film, Reynolds agreed to star in and financially back a psychological thriller called What's the Matter with Helen?, which went into production in 1970. Reynolds didn't just act in this movie. She invested $800,000 of her own money into the production and served as an uncredited producer, taking on significant financial risk for a dark, violent film that was completely different from her wholesome image. NBC put up $750,000 to help finance the movie, essentially using it as a way to partially fulfill their original promise to star Reynolds in a network-produced feature film. What's the Matter with Helen was a horror thriller in the hagsploitation genre that was popular in the early 1970s, films that featured aging actresses in disturbing psychological dramas. The movie starred Reynolds alongside Shelley Winters as two women whose sons have been convicted of murder, forcing them to flee their hometown and start a dance school in Hollywood while being stalked by mysterious threats. The film included graphic violence, a shocking ending, and represented Reynolds' attempt to break away from her girl-next-door reputation and prove she could handle serious dramatic roles. The production was difficult, with tensions on set and budget constraints, but the movie eventually developed a cult following among horror fans and was praised by directors like Quentin Tarantino for its twisted plot and strong performances. Fact 10. Tom Bosley's Pre-Happy Days gig. 4 years before Tom Bosley became one of television's most beloved fathers as Howard Cunningham on Happy Days, he was playing Debbie Reynolds' brother-in-law Bob Landers on The Debbie Reynolds Show, just one stop in a long journey through unsuccessful sitcoms. Bosley had already won a Tony Award in 1959 for playing New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia in the Broadway musical Fiorello, and had appeared in numerous television shows throughout the 1960s, but he couldn't seem to find a series that lasted more than a season. The Debbie Reynolds Show was another short-lived entry on his resume, where he played Bob Landers, the husband of Debbie's sister Charlotte, appearing regularly throughout the show's single season. After this show ended in 1970, Bosley continued bouncing between failed series. He was a regular on The Sandy Duncan Show, which lasted one season from 1972 to 73, and he spent 2 seasons on The Dean Martin Show before that ended in 1974. Bosley also provided voice work for an animated series called Wait Till Your Father Gets Home during this period, playing yet another father figure. Interestingly, the role of Howard Cunningham on Happy Days had originally been offered to actor Harold Gould, who played the part in the original pilot called New Family in Town that aired as part of Love American Style in 1969. When Happy Days was picked up as a regular series in 1974, Bosley replaced Gould and finally found the hit show that had eluded him for decades, playing Mr. Cunningham for 11 seasons and becoming permanently associated with the wholesome father role. Fact 11. Debbie broke the fourth wall weekly. Every single episode of The Debbie Reynolds Show ended with something unusual that most sitcoms would never attempt. Debbie Reynolds literally stepped out of character to directly address the television audience. After the episode's story concluded and before the final credits rolled, Reynolds would turn toward the camera and speak to viewers as herself, rather than as her character Debbie Thompson, thanking them for watching the show. This breaking of the fourth wall was an uncommon convention for sitcoms in 1969, when most series maintained the illusion that viewers were watching real events unfold and characters didn't acknowledge they were on television. The technique had been used occasionally in variety shows and some earlier programs, but it was rare to see it employed consistently week after week on a traditional narrative sitcom. Reynolds' direct addresses to the audience created an interesting dynamic. She was simultaneously asking viewers to believe in her character's fictional adventures while also reminding them every week that she was an actress performing for their entertainment. Some television critics and audiences found this approach charming and personal, as if Reynolds was inviting viewers into her home and thanking them like guests leaving a party. Others felt it was awkward and undermined the show's storytelling by constantly pulling viewers out of the fictional world the writers had worked to create. The weekly fourth wall breaking also highlighted Reynolds' star power and reminded audiences that this was the Debbie Reynolds Show rather than the Debbie Thompson Show, emphasizing the actress over the character in a way that kept the focus on Reynolds' celebrity personality rather than the sitcom's fictional premise. Fact 12. Only 26 episodes, stretched across 50 weeks. The Debbie Reynolds Show technically lasted one season, but the way NBC scheduled those episodes made the show's presence on television last far longer than its actual production. 26 episodes were filmed and aired during the 1969 to 1970 television season, with the premiere airing on September 16, 1969, and the final new episode broadcasting on April 14, 1970. However, these 26 episodes were stretched across 50 weeks of programming through an aggressive schedule of repeats and reruns, meaning NBC filled nearly an entire year of their Tuesday night 8 o'clock time slot with this single season of content. The network would air new episodes for a few weeks, then insert repeat episodes to fill gaps in the schedule, particularly during holiday periods when viewership patterns changed. Summer brought an entirely new wave of reruns, with NBC showing episodes again from late April through the beginning of September 1970, keeping the show on the air even though no new content was being produced. This scheduling strategy was common for networks trying to maximize their investment in expensive programming. But it created a strange situation where viewers might have felt like the Debbie Reynolds Show was lasting forever despite its behind-the-scenes troubles. The extensive rerun schedule also meant that even after Reynolds' public battle with NBC over cigarette advertising had made headlines and effectively ended any chance of renewal, audiences continued seeing new-to-them episodes for months afterward. By the time the final scheduled rerun aired in September of 1970, viewers had been watching some version of the Debbie Reynolds Show for an entire year, even though the show had effectively been canceled months earlier. Fact 13. BBC dumped it in television's graveyard. When the Debbie Reynolds Show crossed the Atlantic to air on British television, the BBC made it abundantly clear what they thought of the program through their scheduling choice. The network acquired all 26 episodes and compressed them into a brief run from January through mid-August of 1970. But instead of giving the show a prime evening time slot, they buried it at 5:40 in the afternoon on Saturdays, universally recognized as one of the worst possible time slots in television. Saturday at 5:40 meant the show aired when most people were either still out shopping, preparing for evening plans, or doing weekend activities rather than sitting in front of their televisions. This scheduling choice was the BBC's way of fulfilling their contract to air the show they'd purchased, while simultaneously acknowledging they had no faith it would attract significant viewership. British television critics and viewers who remembered the show later confirmed that the terrible time slot reflected the BBC's low opinion of the program, with some describing it as dead-awful schedule slot territory, where shows went to die quietly. The BBC was fully aware that the Debbie Reynolds Show was nothing special, according to people who worked in British television at the time, and they scheduled it accordingly, rather than pretending it deserved better treatment. The compressed schedule also meant British audiences burned through all 26 episodes in just 8 months, compared to the American broadcasts that stretched those same episodes across a full year, suggesting the BBC wanted to fulfill their obligation and move on quickly. The 5:40 Saturday afternoon time slot became symbolic of how poorly the show was regarded internationally, proving that the Debbie Reynolds Show struggled to find respect on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Fact 14. Reynolds later called it her stupidest mistake. Years after the dust settled from her battle with NBC over cigarette advertising, Debbie Reynolds publicly admitted that fighting the network over tobacco commercials might have been the wrong decision for her career. In various interviews and in her autobiography, Reynolds specifically called her stance against NBC the stupidest mistake of my entire career, expressing deep regret about how she handled the situation despite her moral objections to cigarette promotion. Reynolds explained that while she genuinely believed cigarette advertising was harmful and inappropriate for family programming, the way she confronted NBC and the public nature of her fight created negative publicity that permanently damaged her relationship with the network and hurt her standing in the television industry. She acknowledged that she had been television's highest-paid female performer at the time and threw it all away over a principle, costing herself approximately $2 million in immediate lost income, plus the guaranteed second season, the feature film deal, and the ownership stake in future programming. In her statement about the controversy, Reynolds said, "Maybe I was a fool to quit the show, but at least I was an honest fool. I'm not a phony or pretender. With me, it wasn't a question of money, but integrity. I'm the one who has to live with myself." This quote reveals Reynolds' internal conflict. She was proud of standing up for her beliefs, but also recognized the enormous professional cost of that stand. Reynolds later noted that she was especially concerned about cigarette advertising because of the number of children who watched her show, making her stance about protecting young viewers from tobacco promotion. Fact 15. The creator also invented the teleprompter. Jess Oppenheimer wasn't just a brilliant television producer and writer. He was also a prolific inventor who held 18 patents for various devices, including one invention that changed broadcasting forever. Oppenheimer invented the in-the-lens teleprompter, the device that allows television personalities, news anchors, and even presidents to read scripts while appearing to make direct eye contact with viewers through the camera. This innovation revolutionized television production by eliminating the need for performers to memorize long scripts or awkwardly read from cue cards positioned beside cameras, creating a more natural and engaging viewing experience. The first people to use Oppenheimer's teleprompter invention on television were his I Love Lucy stars Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who tested it during a film commercial for Philip Morris cigarettes that aired on December 14, 1953. Ironically, another connection between Oppenheimer's work and tobacco advertising. The in-the-lens teleprompter became standard equipment in television studios and news broadcasts, with every major news anchor from Walter Cronkite to modern-day broadcasters relying on Oppenheimer's invention to deliver their reports. Presidents have used the device for speeches and addresses for decades, allowing them to appear more natural and connected with audiences rather than obviously reading from prepared texts. Oppenheimer's other inventions ranged from practical devices to creative solutions for television production problems, demonstrating his ability to think beyond just writing and producing to solve technical challenges. The teleprompter patent alone could have made Oppenheimer wealthy, but his primary legacy remained his creative work on I Love Lucy and other television shows rather than his inventions.